A sharp sound in the forest makes the doctor stop his walk, sensing something strange in the air. Among the vegetation, a gorilla emerges from the shadows, his gaze full of alert and tension. The animal seems to recognize the human, but the moment is interrupted by a threatening noise. The connection between them could be the key to facing the approaching danger. The dense Ituri forest stretched out majestically before Dr. Ethan Morgan's eyes. The 45-year-old veterinarian adjusted his binoculars as he observed the green horizon that seemed to merge with the African sky. 20 years dedicated to the study and protection of gorillas had not diminished his fascination for this natural paradise he had called home for so long. The base camp, established just 3 days ago, was buzzing with activity. Researchers and local assistants moved with precision, preparing equipment and reviewing data from the latest observations. Ethan smiled as he saw the enthusiasm of Olivia, his new assistant, a young Spanish veterinarian who had arrived just a month ago, determined to follow in his footsteps in primate conservation. "Dr. Morgan?" called Olivia as she approached with a tablet in hand. "The results of the latest sampling are concerning. The gorilla population in the northern sector has decreased by 15% compared to last year." Ethan took the tablet, studying the graphs with a frown. The numbers confirmed his fears. Something was altering the delicate balance of the region. "Have you noticed any pattern in the movements of the groups?" he asked, sliding his finger across the screen. "The groups seem to be migrating south, away from their usual territories," Olivia replied, pointing to several spots on the digital map. "It's as if something is pushing them." The veterinarian nodded thoughtfully. In 2 decades, he had learned to interpret the signals of the jungle, and his instinct told him that this situation required closer investigation. "Prepare the basic equipment," he instructed Olivia. "I'll do a solo reconnaissance to the north. I need to see this for myself." As he prepared his backpack, memories of his first encounter with Zuri flooded his mind. That sick gorilla that had changed his life forever. Tuberculosis had nearly killed him, but together they had achieved the impossible. Ethan vividly remembered the sleepless nights, monitoring his vital signs, administering medications, fighting against time and nature itself to save a life. With the equipment ready and GPS in hand, Ethan ventured into the thickness of the jungle. The humid, dense air enveloped him as he advanced cautiously, his senses alert to every sound and movement. The vegetation was denser in this area, and sun rays barely filtered through the canopy of centennial trees. After 2 hours of walking, something changed in the environment. The birdsong abruptly ceased and an unsettling silence took over the place. Ethan stopped, straining his ears. That's when he heard it, a shrill cry that froze his blood. It wasn't the usual sound of a gorilla communicating with its group. This cry conveyed anguish, panic. His rational mind told him he should return to camp and organize an expedition with more personnel. But something in that call touched a deep fiber within him. He recognized that unique quality in the sound, that familiarity he couldn't explain but felt in his gut. Moving forward with greater caution, Ethan began to notice worrying signs. Broken branches and marks on the ground told a story of recent conflict. His years of experience allowed him to read the terrain like an open book. A group of gorillas had passed through here, and not under normal conditions. The footprints showed patterns of flight, of confrontation. The discovery of abandoned equipment confirmed his suspicions. Nets, ropes, and other implements typical of poachers lay scattered among the vegetation. Ethan meticulously photographed each piece of evidence with his camera, documenting the scene. His heart raced as he thought of the implications. Poachers were active in the area, and the gorillas were in danger. The cracking of nearby branches alerted him. As he turned, he found himself face to face with the curious gaze of a juvenile gorilla, observing him from the safety of a nearby tree. The animal, no more than 5 years old, showed unusual interest in his presence. Before Ethan could make any movement, the young primate disappeared into the vegetation with surprising agility. "Wait," Ethan whispered, more to himself than to the gorilla that had already left. His instinct told him that this encounter was no coincidence. Juvenile gorillas rarely strayed so far from their groups, let alone approached humans with such curiosity. Following the direction the young gorilla had taken, Ethan advanced with renewed determination. The vegetation became denser and the terrain more rugged. The sun began its descent, tinting the jungle with golden hues that filtered through the leaves like fingers of light. It was then that time seemed to stand still. From among the afternoon shadows, an imposing figure emerged. Ethan held his breath as he recognized the unique features, the familiar scars, the gaze he had seen so many times during those months of intensive treatment. Zuri, the gorilla he had saved years ago, stood before him. The great silverback had grown considerably since their last encounter. His fur showed the characteristic silver tone on his back, a sign of his maturity, and his posture emanated the natural authority of a group leader. However, what impacted Ethan most was the gaze. Those intelligent eyes that seemed to recognize him, that held the memory of those days of struggle against the disease. Zuri's first movement was intimidating, a display of strength typical of dominant males. Ethan remained motionless, maintaining a submissive posture and avoiding direct eye contact as his experience dictated. The gorilla approached, each step resonating in the silence of the jungle. As the distance between them shortened, Zuri's attitude subtly changed. His posture relaxed, and the threatening sounds were replaced by softer, almost inquisitive vocalizations. Ethan contained the emotion that threatened to overflow. Zuri remembered him. The moment of mutual recognition was interrupted by a new cry, this time closer and more urgent. Zuri responded immediately, his behavior changing dramatically. With precise movements, he began to guide Ethan deeper into the jungle, occasionally stopping to ensure he was following. The last hour of light revealed a scene that Ethan would never forget. In a natural clearing, protected by dense vines, he found Zuri's group. The silverback's mate, a female with dark fur and graceful movements, watched cautiously from a distance, while two infants played nearby. However, the joy of this encounter was overshadowed by a worrying reality. One of the little ones showed evident signs of weakness. Ethan recognized the symptoms immediately: labored breathing, lack of energy, occasional coughing. They were the same signs he had observed in Zuri years ago. Tuberculosis, that silent threat that had nearly ended the now imposing silverback's life, seemed to have returned to threaten the next generation. The sun was setting rapidly, and Ethan knew he had to make crucial decisions. The little one needed urgent medical attention, but any intervention would require careful planning and resources he didn't have at that moment. Moreover, the danger of poachers was an immediate threat he couldn't ignore. As he evaluated his options, a distant sound caught his attention. The roar of engines broke the peace of the evening, confirming his fears. The poachers were nearby, probably tracking Zuri's group. Ethan observed how the silverback tensed, his protective posture evidencing years of instinct and experience. The veterinarian understood that he was at a crossroads. He could return to camp to seek help and organize a planned intervention, or stay with the group and do what he could to protect them from the immediate threat. The decision made itself when Zuri, in a gesture that defied all scientific logic, approached Ethan and gently pushed him in the opposite direction of the engine sounds. The message was clear. The gorilla was trying to protect him in the same way he had protected Zuri years ago. With a heavy heart but a clear mind, Ethan began to retreat, mentally documenting every detail of the location. He silently promised that he would return, that he wouldn't abandon Zuri or his family to their fate. Tuberculosis and poachers were threats that required different strategies, and he was determined to face both. As he moved away, protected by the shadows of nightfall, Ethan reflected on the invisible bonds that connected his destiny with that of these magnificent primates. The Ituri forest held more secrets than he imagined, and this reunion with Zuri was just the beginning of a new battle for survival. Night fell over the base camp like a velvet black cloak, dotted with the dim glow of solar lamps. Ethan, seated in front of his tent, frantically reviewed the notes in his field journal while Olivia and the rest of the team listened attentively. "The situation is more serious than we thought," he explained, showing the photographs he had taken during his encounter. "Not only do we have poachers in the area, but there's also the risk of a new tuberculosis outbreak." Olivia examined the images with concern. "Are you sure it's the same Zuri? It's been so many years." Ethan nodded firmly. "The scars on his face are unmistakable. Plus his behavior. There's a connection I can't explain scientifically, but it's there." Dr. Amir, a Congolese veterinarian who had worked with Ethan during the first tuberculosis crisis, approached the group. "If there really is an outbreak, we need to act fast. Last time we almost lost the entire population in the northern sector. Memories of that time flooded Ethan's mind. It was 2015 when they detected the first cases. Tuberculosis had spread like wildfire among the guerrilla groups, and Zuri had been one of the most affected. The establishment of an improvised treatment center in the middle of the jungle had been madness, but also their only resource. "We need an immediate action plan," Ethan declared, unfolding a map on the work table. "Amir, I want you to contact the laboratory in Kinshasa. We'll need all the diagnostic equipment they can send us. Olivia, prepare a complete inventory of our medical supplies." As the team dispersed to fulfill their tasks, Ethan remained studying the map. The red marks indicated the points where he had found evidence of poachers. The pattern was clear. They were systematically encircling the guerrillas' territories. A noise in the darkness alerted him. Marcus, one of the most experienced park rangers, emerged from the shadows. "Dr. Morgan, we found something you need to see." Following Marcus to the edge of the camp, Ethan discovered a new element in the puzzle: tracks of heavy vehicles and tire marks that didn't correspond to the park vehicles. "They're using new routes," Marcus explained in a low voice. "They're avoiding traditional checkpoints. Someone is giving them information from the inside." The news hit Ethan like a punch to the stomach. The idea that there was an informant within the park's protection system greatly complicated the situation. Not only did they have to protect the guerrillas from external threats, but now they also had to deal with internal betrayal. Returning to his tent, Ethan extracted an old worn notebook from his backpack. On its yellowed pages were recorded all the details of Zuri's treatment years ago. Every dose, every reaction, every small progress and setback. That experience had pushed them to the limit of their capabilities, but had also shown that the impossible was possible with enough determination. The first light of dawn found Ethan still awake, planning the strategy. The team gathered for breakfast and the tension was palpable in the air. "I've been thinking," Olivia began, "what if the tuberculosis outbreak isn't accidental? The poachers could be using the disease as a way to weaken the groups, making them more vulnerable." Olivia's theory provoked a sepulchral silence in the camp. Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. The idea was terrible, but it made sense. Poachers had evolved in their methods over the years, becoming more sophisticated and ruthless. "If that's true," Amir intervened, "we're dealing with something much bigger than a simple poaching operation. This would require resources, medical knowledge, and contacts within the system," Ethan completed, remembering Marcus's words. The day passed in a frenzy of activity. The team established a wider surveillance perimeter, installed camera traps at strategic points, and began preparing a mobile treatment center, similar to the one they had used with Zuri years ago. During the afternoon, Ethan received a call that would change the course of events. It was Dr. Elena Durand, a former colleague who now worked at the Tropical Diseases Laboratory in Brussels. "Ethan, the results of the samples you sent last month are worrying." Her voice sounded tense even through the satellite connection. "We've identified a modified strain of tuberculosis. Someone has been experimenting with the pathogen." The revelation confirmed his worst fears. They weren't just dealing with poachers, but with an organization with resources and knowledge to manipulate diseases. The danger was much greater than they had imagined. That night, as the team dined in silence, a familiar sound cut through the darkness. The cry of a gorilla, the same one Ethan had heard the day before. Olivia jumped up, but Ethan stopped her with a gesture. "It's not a call for help," he explained. "It's Zuri. He's marking his territory, warning us of something." Years of experience had taught him to interpret the different sounds and behaviors of gorillas. This particular cry had a specific purpose. Zuri was trying to communicate with them. "Tomorrow at dawn," Ethan announced, "we'll split into 2 teams. Amir and Olivia, you'll start preparing the treatment center here at the camp. Marcus and I will track Zuri's group. We need to assess the health status of that infant and better understand what's happening with the poachers." As the others retired to rest, Ethan remained by the fire, studying the stars through the jungle canopy. His mind wandered between memories of the past and threats of the present. The connection with Zuri, that inexplicable bond forged in days of struggle against death, could be the key to saving not only his family, but the entire gorilla population of Ituri. In the darkness of his tent, Ethan checked his medical equipment one last time. The stethoscope he had used to monitor Zuri's lungs years ago, the carefully packed syringes and medications, the GPS with marked coordinates. Each item was a reminder of the responsibility that weighed on his shoulders. Before sleeping, he wrote one last entry in his journal. The jungle jealously guards its secrets, but it also gives us the tools to uncover them. Zuri taught me that the connection between species goes beyond the science we can measure and document. Tomorrow we begin a new battle, and this time we fight not only against disease, but against the darkness of the human heart. May the wisdom of the jungle guide us. Dawn arrived wrapped in a dense fog that crept between the trees like a silent ghost. Ethan and Marcus set out early, their backpacks loaded with medical equipment and emergency supplies. The morning dew dampened their boots as they advanced along the barely visible path. "The poachers know these routes well," Marcus muttered, pointing to subtle marks on the trees. "These notches aren't natural. They use them to orient themselves in the fog." Ethan nodded, documenting every detail in his GPS. Technology was useful, but Marcus's experience in the field was invaluable. As a veteran park ranger, he had dedicated 2 decades to protecting this region and knew every corner of the jungle like the back of his hand. After 2 hours of walking, they found the first signs of Zuri's group. Abandoned nests, food remains, and more worryingly, signs that the gorillas had moved hastily. "Look at this," Marcus called, crouching next to a fallen tree. In the wet mud, next to the gorilla tracks, there were marks of military boots. "These are recent, from early this morning." Ethan's heart raced. The poachers were closer than they thought. He pulled out his satellite radio and contacted the camp. "Olivia, do you copy?" His assistant's voice came through broken. "Olivia here. The treatment center is almost ready. Amir has identified a pattern in the tuberculosis cases reported in the region. Keep everything prepared. I think we'll need it soon." Ethan cut the communication, aware that any transmission could be intercepted. A familiar sound stopped them in their tracks. It was the young gorilla Ethan had seen the day before, observing them from the safety of a nearby tree. This time, instead of fleeing, the primate emitted a series of soft vocalizations. "He's trying to guide us," Ethan whispered, recognizing the unusual behavior. Zuri must have sent him. Following the young gorilla, they entered a denser area of the jungle. The terrain became more rugged, with steep slopes and thick vegetation. The air was heavy with humidity, and the silence was almost absolute, broken only by the occasional crunch of branches under their feet. Suddenly, Marcus stopped, raising a hand in warning. A few meters away, partially hidden among the vegetation, they found an abandoned camp. It wasn't the typical temporary site of poachers. This showed signs of a more sophisticated operation. "Medical equipment," Ethan murmured, examining the remains. "Syringes, vials, they're experimenting with something." Among the debris, a charred document caught his attention. Although much of it was destroyed, some words were legible: Project Nemesis and Controlled Pathogen Modification. "This is bigger than we imagined," said Marcus, photographing the evidence. "We need to alert international authorities." A sharp cry cut through the air, followed by the unmistakable sound of gunshots in the distance. Without needing words, both men moved quickly toward the conflict, guided by instinct and urgency. What they found was a chaotic scene. Zuri's group was scattered, with the female and infants trying to escape, while the silverback kept 3 armed hunters at bay. But these weren't ordinary hunters. Their equipment and behavior suggested military training. Ethan acted on instinct. Using the radio, he sent an emergency signal to the camp with their exact coordinates. Then, along with Marcus, they began to make as much noise as possible, hitting trees and shouting to confuse the attackers. The strategy worked momentarily. The hunters, surprised by the noise coming from multiple directions, were distracted enough for Zuri to regroup his family. It was then that Ethan saw it. One of the hunters carried a rifle with tranquilizer darts, and he wasn't aiming at the adults, but at the infants. The terrible reality hit him. They didn't just want to capture the gorillas. They were using the infants as test subjects for their tuberculosis experiment. Amidst the chaos, Zuri demonstrated his extraordinary intelligence once again. Instead of attacking directly, he began to knock down small trees and branches, creating natural barriers between the hunters and his family. His movements were precise, calculated, as if he had learned from previous experiences. Ethan took advantage of the confusion to approach the sick gorilla infant. The little one showed all the classic symptoms of tuberculosis, But there was something different, something that didn't fit with his previous experiences with the disease. "Ethan, watch out!" Marcus's shout came too late. A fourth hunter, who had remained hidden, emerged from the vegetation directly behind Ethan. The veterinarian felt the cold metal of a weapon against his back. "So you're the famous Dr. Morgan?" The voice had a marked European accent. "The man who cures gorillas, how convenient to find you here." Zuri, sensing the danger, let out a deafening roar. The other hunters instinctively retreated, but the man pointing at Ethan remained impassive. "Your gorillas are more resistant than we expected," the man continued. "The modified strain should have weakened them more quickly. Perhaps you can help us understand why." The pieces of the puzzle fell into place in Ethan's mind. This wasn't just a group of poachers. It was an organized operation using disease as a weapon, testing a modified version of tuberculosis on the gorillas before... The thought was interrupted by a familiar sound: helicopter rotors. The park's rapid response team, alerted by Ethan's emergency signal, was finally arriving. What happened next occurred in a matter of seconds. Zuri, taking advantage of the distraction caused by the helicopter, charged against the man threatening Ethan. The hunter fired, but the gorilla's movement made him miss. Ethan rolled on the ground, moving away from danger, while Marcus and the park rangers descending from the helicopter surrounded the area. The hunters, outnumbered and surprised by the arrival of reinforcements, tried to flee, but the area was already cordoned off. Amidst the chaos, Ethan noticed that Zuri and his family disappeared into the thickness of the jungle, moving with a coordination that only years of survival could teach. When the dust settled, the hunters were in custody and the camp secured. Among the confiscated equipment, they found crucial evidence: documents detailing Project Nemesis, a plan to develop and test biological weapons using wildlife as test subjects. Ethan, sitting on a rock while a medic attended to his minor injuries, observed the direction in which Zuri's group had disappeared. He knew this wasn't the end, but just the beginning of a bigger battle. The sick infant needed treatment, and now they had to face not only natural disease but a modified and potentially more dangerous version. "Do you think they'll come back?" asked Olivia, who had just arrived with the medical team. Ethan nodded slowly. "Zuri knows we can help. He'll return when it's safe. Meanwhile, we have work to do." The fog was beginning to dissipate, revealing a new day in the Ituri forest, a day that marked the beginning of a new phase in the struggle for survival of these extraordinary primates. The tension in the improvised meeting room of the camp was palpable. On the table, spread out like pieces of a macabre puzzle, lay the documents recovered from the poachers' camp. Ethan, along with an international team of experts who had arrived urgently, examined every detail with meticulous attention. "The genetic modification of the pathogen is sophisticated," explained Dr. Sophie Laurent, a virologist from the Pasteur Institute. "Whoever designed this has access to cutting-edge technology and advanced knowledge of genetic engineering." Ethan flipped through the pages of the report, stopping at graphs showing the progression of the disease. "They've altered the incubation period," he pointed out. "Normal tuberculosis takes weeks to show symptoms, but this variant acts in days. What I don't understand," Amir intervened, "is why the gorillas? Why not use laboratory animals?" The answer came from Dr. Elena Durand, who had flown in from Brussels after analyzing the initial samples. "Because gorillas share 98% of our DNA. They're the perfect stepping stone before..." The silence that followed was deafening. The implication was clear. The gorillas were just the beginning. The real objective was to develop a biological weapon for use against humans. At that moment, Olivia rushed into the room. "Dr. Morgan, you need to see this." She projected on the wall images from the camera traps installed the day before. The photographs showed Zuri and his group, but there was something more. Human figures in biological protection suits following the group during the night. "They haven't abandoned the operation," Ethan murmured. "They've just regrouped." The meeting transformed into a strategic planning session. The team needed to act on multiple fronts: treat the infected gorillas, track the remaining operatives, and dismantle the network behind Project Nemesis. "Something doesn't add up," said Marcus, pointing to a series of coordinates in the documents. "These locations, they're prior to the appearance of the first cases. They've been preparing this for months." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. He remembered the words of the captured hunter. Your gorillas are more resistant than we expected. Suddenly, a terrible idea began to take shape in his mind. Zuri, he whispered. It's no coincidence that his group was the first to be attacked. They're after him because he survived natural tuberculosis. They want to understand why his immune system is so strong. The theory made sense. The treatment Ethan had developed years ago to save Zuri had been revolutionary, combining Western medicine with traditional local knowledge. The results had been extraordinary. Not only had he survived, but he had developed exceptional resistance. The treatment archives, Olivia suddenly said. Where are they? Ethan quickly headed to his tent. The old notebook, where he had documented the entire recovery process of Zuri, was not where he had left it. Someone had been snooping through his belongings. The search in the camp revealed more disturbing clues. Several medical equipments had been tampered with, and some specific supplies were missing. The infiltrator Marcus had mentioned was still active, observing every move. That night, while the team established reinforced surveillance shifts, Ethan found himself alone in his tent, reviewing old photographs of Zuri during his treatment. Each image told a story of survival, of adaptation, of a connection that transcended the barriers between species. A sound outside the tent alerted him. As he peered out, he saw a familiar figure at the edge of the camp, the young gorilla that seemed to act as a messenger. This time, the primate left something on the ground before disappearing into the darkness. Cautiously, Ethan approached the object. It was a large leaf, rolled up in a way that could only be intentional. Inside, he found several leaves and barks that he immediately recognized. They were the same medicinal plants he had used in Zuri's treatment. They're communicating with us, Ethan explained to the team gathered for an emergency meeting. Zuri not only remembers the treatment, he's trying to recreate it for his infant. The revelation provoked an intense debate. Traditional scientists argued that it was impossible for a gorilla to have understood and remembered the details of medical treatment. But Ethan, backed by researchers who had worked with great apes, maintained that they had underestimated the intelligence and learning capacity of these animals. We need to modify our strategy, he finally declared. We can't wait for them to come to us. We have to bring the treatment to them. The plan that developed over the next few hours was risky. They would establish several mobile treatment centers at strategic points in the jungle, camouflaged to avoid detection by poachers. Each center would be equipped with medical supplies and the traditional plants that Zuri had identified. But how will they know where to find us? Asked one of the new researchers. Ethan smiled for the first time in days. Zuri will guide us. He's been marking safe routes all this time. We just need to learn to read his signals. As the team prepared for the new phase of the operation, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at the complexity of the situation. What had begun as a conservation mission had become a race against time where the survival of the gorillas and potentially of humanity was at stake. In his journal that night, he wrote, "The jungle is teaching us that true intelligence knows no species. Zuri is not just a patient or a subject of study, he is a collaborator in this fight. And perhaps in his ancestral wisdom, he holds the key to stopping this threat before it's too late." The dawn of the fifth day brought with it a torrential rain that transformed the Ituri forest into a maze of mud and water. In the main camp, now fortified and guarded 24 hours a day, Ethan and his team were finalizing the details of their risky plan. "The mobile centers are ready," reported Olivia, pointing to 5 spots on the digital map. "We've camouflaged each one following the natural patterns of the local vegetation." Amir, who had just returned from an inspection round, added, "The park rangers have established a security perimeter. No one enters or leaves without being detected." Ethan was studying the latest satellite photographs intently when Dr. Elena Durand burst into the command tent. Her normally serene face showed signs of concern. "The blood tests of the captured hunters revealed something disturbing," she announced, spreading several reports on the table. "They all show signs of exposure to the modified tuberculosis, but none of them are sick. They're immunized." The revelation fell like a bomb in the room. If the hunters were protected against the disease they were spreading, it meant that the project was much more advanced than they had imagined. "This isn't just experimentation," Ethan murmured. "They already have a vaccine. The gorillas aren't the final target. They're the testing ground to perfect both the pathogen and its cure." Marcus, who had remained silent until then, approached the map. "They've been playing us all along. While we were chasing hunters in the north, Their true base of operations could be anywhere. The rain intensified outside, its constant drumming providing an ominous backdrop to their deliberations. Suddenly, a series of alerts began to sound on the surveillance monitors. "Movement in the eastern sector," reported one of the technicians. "A large group of guerrillas is moving towards one of our mobile centers." The cameras showed an image that left everyone breathless. Zuri was leading not only his family, but several groups of guerrillas. It was unprecedented behavior. Territorial groups rarely mixed in this way. "He's gathering the infected," Ethan realized. Somehow he's coordinating a collective response to the threat. But there was something else in the images that caught his attention. Among the guerrillas, several individuals showed unusual behavior patterns: slower movements, frequent coughing, clear signs of the disease. However, others seemed completely healthy despite being in close contact with the infected. "That's it," exclaimed Elena, who had also noticed the pattern. "Some guerrillas have natural resistance to the disease. Not just Zuri, but others who probably survived previous exposures." Ethan began to connect the dots. That's why the hunters are so interested in this specific group. They're not just looking for Zuri. They're trying to understand how some gorillas have developed natural immunity. The discovery added a new dimension to their mission. They not only needed to treat the sick, they had to protect those who showed natural resistance. Their blood and tissues could contain the key to developing an effective cure. As the team prepared to mobilize towards the nearest treatment center, a new alarm sounded in the security system. The perimeter cameras in the south caught movement. Figures in protective suits were advancing stealthily among the vegetation. "Those aren't our teams," Marcus confirmed. "The way they move, they're military." Ethan made a quick decision. "Olivia, you and Elena go to the treatment center. Start with the protocols we established. Amir, coordinate with the park rangers to intercept the intruders. Marcus and I will follow Zuri. We need to understand what he's trying to show us." The team dispersed under the torrential rain. Ethan and Marcus equipped themselves with the essentials: basic medical equipment, encrypted communication devices, and crucially, samples of the medicinal plants that Zuri had identified. As they ventured into the jungle, following the signs the guerrillas had left, Ethan reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had led them to this point. Nature once again proved to be more complex and surprising than science had imagined. Through the curtain of rain, they began to distinguish moving shapes. Zuri's group had stopped in a natural clearing, protected by dense trees. What they saw there defied all their expectations. The guerrillas had organized themselves in a way that seemed almost human. The sick individuals were grouped in the center, surrounded by those showing signs of resistance. The youngest and most vulnerable were kept at a safe distance, but under constant vigilance. "They're practicing social distancing," Marcus whispered, amazed. "They've learned from previous experiences with the disease." Ethan observed how Zuri moved between the groups, his behavior reminiscent of a doctor visiting patients. At times he guided the sick ones towards certain plants, the same ones that had been part of his own treatment years ago. "He didn't just survive," Ethan murmured. "He learned. And now he's teaching others." Thunder rumbled in the distance, and with it, the unmistakable sound of approaching helicopters. The battle for the survival of the Ituri guerrillas was entering its most critical phase, and Ethan knew that the next few hours would determine not only the fate of these extraordinary primates, but possibly the future of modern medicine. The rain had subsided, leaving behind a thick mist that crept between the trees like a ghostly blanket. Ethan and Marcus remained hidden at their observation point, documenting every movement of the guerrilla group while helicopters flew overhead. 3 aircraft, Marcus whispered, adjusting his binoculars. "Not from the park. Military design, no visible identification." Ethan activated his encrypted radio. "Olivia, do you copy?" His assistant's voice came through, broken. "We're at Treatment Center Alpha. Eleanor has identified patterns in the blood samples. There's something you need to know." The transmission cut off abruptly. At that moment, Zuri emitted a low sound, a signal that Ethan immediately recognized as a warning. The group began to move in a coordinated manner, dividing into smaller subgroups. "They're using a dispersal strategy," Ethan observed, "but there's something more." The guerrillas showing resistance to the disease were strategically dividing themselves, each leading a different group. It was as if they were consciously distributing immunity among the population. A sudden memory hit Ethan. Years ago, during Zuri's treatment, he had noticed something similar. The healthy gorillas spent specific time with the sick ones, as if trying to transmit something more than simple companionship. "Marcus," he whispered urgently, "I need you to return to the camp. Look for my notes from 2015, specifically the observations on social behavior during quarantine. And you? I'll follow Zuri. There's something in his behavior that seems familiar. I think he's recreating the treatment protocol we used with him." As Marcus stealthily moved away, Ethan began to move parallel to the main group of gorillas. The mist provided cover, but also made tracking difficult. However, years of experience had taught him to read the subtlest signs: bent branches, marks in the mud, movement patterns in the vegetation. Through his radio, he caught fragments of communications. Amir's team had intercepted several intruders on the southern perimeter, and Olivia reported unusual activity near Treatment Center Beta. Suddenly, the sound of the helicopters changed. They were no longer circling, but seemed to be descending. Ethan consulted his GPS. They were close to an old abandoned research station, a place he knew well. "Base, this is Ethan," he whispered into his radio. "The helicopters are heading to Omega Station. I need confirmation of activity in that sector." The response came in the form of static, but it didn't matter. Ethan had already made his decision. Omega Station had been his base of operations during Zuri's original treatment. If anyone was looking for answers about the gorilla's immunity, that place contained crucial information. As he advanced, he noticed that Zuri's behavior had changed. The gorilla was no longer moving randomly. He was following a specific route, one that Ethan recognized with a shiver. It was the same path they had used to transport medical supplies years ago. Through the mist, the abandoned structure of Omega Station began to materialize. Ethan stopped short. Lights were moving inside the building, and figures in protective suits were entering and leaving, carrying equipment. His radio suddenly came to life. "Ethan, it's Elena. The analyses show something extraordinary. The blood of the resistant gorillas contains antibodies that not only fight the modified tuberculosis, but seem to adapt and evolve with it. It's as if their immune system had learned to anticipate the pathogen's mutations." The revelation hit Ethan like a shockwave. The hunters weren't after the gorillas to test a new biological weapon. They were looking for the key to an adaptive immunity that could revolutionize modern medicine. A movement in his periphery caught his attention. Zuri had separated from his group and was watching him intently from the safety of a nearby tree. In his eyes, Ethan saw something he had first noticed during those days of intensive treatment. Understanding. The gorilla began to move towards the station, but not directly. He was tracing a circular pattern as if evaluating the perimeter. Other gorillas emerged from the mist, strategically positioning themselves around the building. Ethan realized he was witnessing something unprecedented, a coordinated operation planned and executed by the gorillas themselves. They weren't simply victims fleeing a threat. They were organizing an active response. His radio crackled again. "Dr. Morgan," it was Marcus's voice, "I found the notes. There's something you need to see. In 2015, you documented unusual behavior. The recovered gorillas began collecting and storing certain medicinal plants. They weren't just using them, they were cultivating them." The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together. Zuri's resistance wasn't just the result of medical treatment. It was a combination of natural adaptation, social learning, and a form of traditional medicine that the gorillas had developed and perfected over generations. As he watched the scene unfold, Ethan knew he was on the brink of a discovery that could change not only the way we understand great apes, but our very understanding of the evolution of intelligence and medicine. The mist was beginning to dissipate, and with it the last doubts about what he needed to do next. The battle for the survival of the Ituri gorillas had evolved into something much deeper, a lesson on the interconnection between species and the ancestral wisdom that could save not only these magnificent primates, but potentially humanity itself. Omega Station loomed like a ghost from the past among the vegetation that had begun to reclaim it. Ethan, hidden in the thick undergrowth, observed the comings and goings of the militarized teams, while his mind processed the information he had just received. "Base to Ethan," Olivia's voice emerged from the radio. "Elena has completed the preliminary genetic analysis. The antibodies of the resistant gorillas show a unique characteristic. They can be transferred from one individual to another through prolonged close contact. This revelation explained the behavior he had observed. The way the resistant gorillas distributed themselves among the groups wasn't random. It was a deliberate natural immunization strategy. A movement caught his attention. Zuri had begun a series of soft vocalizations, different from anything Ethan had documented before. Gradually, other gorillas emerged from their hiding places, moving in a pattern that seemed almost choreographed. Dr. Morgan, Amir's voice joined the conversation over the radio. The analyses of the plants that Zuri has been collecting show something extraordinary. They contain compounds that act as natural immune system enhancers. But there's more. The way they're being combined suggests advanced pharmacological knowledge. Ethan observed as Zuri guided his group towards a specific area of the jungle. The gorilla stopped next to a group of plants that Ethan immediately recognized. They were the same ones they had used in his treatment years ago, but now they were growing in a pattern that couldn't be natural. "They've been cultivating their own pharmacy," he murmured to himself, documenting the scene with his camera. They didn't just survive the disease, they developed their own preventive medicine. A metallic noise from the station interrupted his thoughts. The military teams were loading boxes onto the helicopters, boxes marked with biohazard symbols. His radio came to life again. "Ethan, it's Marcus. I found something in the old archives." In 2015, during Zuri's treatment, there were unauthorized visits to the station. Someone else was studying the recovery process. The pieces were starting to fit together. Project Nemesis hadn't started with the hunters. It had been born here at Omega Station, when someone recognized the potential of the gorilla's adaptive immunity. A sharp cry cut through the air. One of the young gorillas had been spotted by the station guards. Ethan watched in horror as two armed men approached the animal, but before he could react, Zuri emerged from the vegetation. He didn't attack directly. Instead, he began a series of movements that Ethan immediately recognized. He was recreating the distraction routines they had used during his treatment to administer medications. The guards, bewildered by the gorilla's unusual behavior, momentarily lowered their weapons. It was all the group needed. In a matter of seconds, several adult gorillas emerged from different directions, creating a living barrier between the guards and the young one. "Base," Ethan whispered into his radio. "I need all teams to hold position. We're witnessing something unprecedented." The scene unfolding before his eyes defied all conventional logic. The gorillas weren't simply reacting on instinct. They were executing a coordinated strategy that combined techniques learned during treatment with their own social intelligence. Eleanor's voice emerged from the radio. "Ethan, the latest analyses confirm something extraordinary. The gorilla's antibodies don't just fight tuberculosis, they're evolving faster than the modified pathogen. It's as if their immune system had developed a form of adaptive prediction." As he observed the interaction between the gorillas and the guards, Ethan noticed something else. Zuri was guiding his group towards the area where they had found the medicinal plants. They weren't just escaping, they were protecting their natural pharmacy. "Dr. Morgan," Olivia's voice sounded urgent, "the helicopters are preparing to take off. They have blood and tissue samples. If they take those..." She didn't need to finish the sentence. If those samples reached a laboratory controlled by those behind Project Nemesis, they could use the gorilla's natural immunity for purposes that went beyond medicine. Ethan made a decision. Activating his radio on all frequencies, including those he had detected the military teams using, he began to transmit. "Attention all units. This is Dr. Ethan Morgan. What you are witnessing is the result of decades of natural evolution and social adaptation. The gorillas are not just carriers of a unique immunity, they are guardians of medical knowledge that has evolved over generations. Any attempt to artificially synthesize these compounds without understanding the full context could be catastrophic." As he spoke, he noticed that Zuri was watching him intently. At that moment, Ethan understood that he wasn't just trying to save the gorillas from an immediate threat. He was defending something much deeper, the right of a species to protect and transmit its ancestral knowledge. The mist was beginning to lift, revealing a scene that would be forever etched in the memory of all present. Humans and gorillas faced in a decisive moment that would determine not only the future of conservation, but our very understanding of intelligence and natural medicine. The air was charged with electric tension as Ethan's voice resonated through the radios. The armed guards looked at each other, clearly disconcerted by the unprecedented situation they found themselves in. The helicopter rotors began to spin more slowly, as if even the machines sensed the gravity of the moment. Zuri, the imposing silverback, took a step forward. His gaze, filled with an intelligence that defied human comprehension, fixed on Ethan. The veterinarian understood the silent message. It was time to bridge two worlds. With slow and deliberate movements, Ethan emerged from his hiding place. "My name is Dr. Ethan Morgan," he announced, addressing both the guards and the scientists now exiting Omega Station. "What you're seeing here isn't just an endangered animal population. It's the result of millennia of evolution and adaptation, a source of medical knowledge that we're only beginning to understand." A man in a suit, who clearly didn't belong to the military team, stepped forward. "Dr. Morgan, I'm Dr. Victor Klaus, Director of Project Nemesis. Your reputation precedes you, but you must understand that what we're doing here goes beyond conservation. We're on the brink of a revolutionary medical breakthrough." Ethan held his ground, aware that Zuri and his group had strategically positioned themselves around him. "Dr. Klaus, what you see as a medical breakthrough is actually the result of a complex network of knowledge passed down through generations among these gorillas. It's not just biology, it's culture, it's living history." As he spoke, Ethan noticed that Olivia and Elena cautiously emerged from the jungle, joining him. Elena carried a tablet in her hands and, with a silent gesture, indicated she had crucial information. "What Dr. Morgan is saying is true," Elena intervened, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength with each word. "Our analyses show that the adaptive immunity of these gorillas isn't just the result of random genetic mutations. There's evidence that their social behavior, their eating habits, and their use of medicinal plants have actively influenced the evolution of their immune system." Olivia added, "We've documented how they transmit this knowledge to younger generations. It's not blind instinct, it's active teaching." Dr. Klaus seemed to consider this information. "Interesting, certainly, but how do you explain the resistance to our modified strain of tuberculosis? That goes beyond natural evolution." It was at that moment that Zuri did something that left everyone breathless. With deliberate movements, he approached a group of nearby plants. Using his hands with surprising dexterity, he began to mix leaves and barks from different species, creating a greenish paste. Ethan, understanding what was happening, explained, "What you're witnessing is guerrilla pharmacology in action. Zuri is recreating the treatment we used years ago, but with modifications. They've been experimenting, adapting their natural medicine to combat new threats." Dr. Klaus, visibly impacted, moved closer to observe better. "This is extraordinary, but how can we be sure this isn't simply learned behavior from your previous treatment?" "Because," Amir intervened, having just arrived with Marcus, "we've found evidence of this type of behavior in gorilla groups that have never had contact with humans. It's ancestral knowledge perfected over generations," Marcus added, "and we've discovered something else in the old archives. Tuberculosis isn't the first pandemic these gorillas have faced. There are records of similar events dating back decades. Each time, the gorillas have developed new survival strategies." Dr. Klaus seemed to be struggling internally. On one hand, the scientist in him was fascinated by what he was witnessing. On the other, it was evident that he had invested years in Project Nemesis and wasn't willing to abandon it easily. "What do you propose, then?" he finally asked. "That we abandon years of research and millions in funding?" Ethan stepped forward, positioning himself next to Zuri. The contrast between the human and the gorilla united in this crucial moment was a powerful image. "I propose a collaboration, not between humans and laboratory animals, but between two intelligent species, each with its own unique knowledge and skills. Imagine," he continued, his voice filled with passion, "a research project where we not only study the gorillas but learn from them, where we combine our scientific knowledge with their ancestral wisdom. We could develop treatments that not only cure diseases, but strengthen immune systems naturally and sustainably." Eleanor intervened. "Our preliminary analyses suggest that the compounds found in the plants used by the gorillas have properties we haven't even begun to understand. This could revolutionize not just the treatment of tuberculosis, but potentially many other diseases." Dr. Klaus seemed to be reconsidering his position. And how do you propose we carry out this collaboration? We'll establish a research center right here in Ituri, Ethan responded. A place where scientists and gorillas can interact in a natural environment, where we can observe, learn, and collaborate without interfering with their natural behavior patterns. As he spoke, Zuri approached Dr. Klaus, offering him a small portion of the herbal mixture he had prepared. The gesture was clear, an offer of peace, of collaboration. Dr. Klaus, after a moment of hesitation, accepted the offering. "This goes against every scientific protocol I know," he said with a mixture of amazement and resignation. "But I suppose if we're going to revolutionize medicine, we'll have to be willing to revolutionize our methods as well." As the sun began to set over the Ituri forest, illuminating the scene with golden hues, Ethan felt he was witnessing the birth of a new era. An era where the barrier between humans and animals blurred, where science and ancestral wisdom united to face the challenges of the future. The battle for the survival of the Ituri gorillas had evolved into something much bigger, a bridge between two worlds, an opportunity to redefine our relationship with nature, and perhaps the path towards a future where collaboration between species would be the key to facing the global threats looming on the horizon. The months following that decisive day at Omega Station were a whirlwind of activity and unprecedented discoveries. The Ituri Gorilla Collaborative Research Center, as it was officially named, quickly became a hive of scientists, conservationists, and of course gorillas. Ethan, standing on the new observation platform built among the treetops, marveled at the panorama spread out before him. The center had been designed to integrate perfectly with the natural environment, using sustainable materials and cutting-edge technology to minimize impact on the ecosystem. "It's incredible how everything has evolved in such a short time," Olivia commented, joining him on the platform. "6 months ago we were fighting against poachers and now—" Ethan nodded, understanding the sense of wonder in his assistant's voice. "Now we're redefining what it means to do science in collaboration with nature." Below, in one of the clearings adapted for interaction, Dr. Klaus sat silently, observing a group of young gorillas manipulating a series of devices designed to stimulate their intelligence and problem-solving skills. The change in the scientist was notable. His initial skepticism had transformed into a deep respect for the gorilla's intelligence and social complexity. "Dr. Morgan," Elena's voice sounded through the communicator on his wrist, "we need you to come to the laboratory. We've made a discovery that I think will interest you." In the main laboratory, a space that combined cutting-edge technology with natural elements to keep the gorillas comfortable during voluntary checkups, Elena and Amir waited with expressions of contained excitement. "We've been analyzing the blood samples from the gorillas that showed natural resistance to the modified tuberculosis," Elena began, projecting a series of holographic graphs in the center of the room. "What we found is astonishing. Their antibodies are not only effective against tuberculosis, but they show an adaptive capacity we've never seen before in any species." Amir continued, "It's as if their immune system had the ability to predict potential mutations of the pathogen and prepare for them. But here's what's really fascinating. This ability seems to be directly related to their diet and their traditional medicinal practices." Ethan studied the data carefully. "Are you suggesting that the continued use of certain medicinal plants has influenced the evolution of their immune system?" "Exactly," Elena confirmed, "and there's more. We've identified compounds in the plants they use that act as trainers for the immune system, preparing it to respond more efficiently to a variety of threats." The implication of this discovery was monumental. Not only had they found a possible cure for resistant tuberculosis, but they were facing a new paradigm in understanding evolution and medicine. "We need to share this with the full team," Ethan declared, "and with Zuri. He deserves to know how crucial his contribution has been." Hours later, in a meeting that combined video conferences with physical presence and which included Zuri and his group observing from a specially adapted area, Ethan presented the findings to the scientific world. "What we're witnessing," he explained, "is not just biological evolution in action. It's the synergy between biological and cultural evolution. The Ituri gorillas haven't just developed resistance to diseases. They've created a system of preventive medicine that is transmitted and perfected from generation to generation." Dr. Klaus, now fully committed to the collaborative approach, added, This completely redefines our understanding of animal intelligence and the potential of natural medicine. Imagine the possibilities if we can learn to train our immune systems in a similar way. As the scientific discussion unfolded, Ethan noticed that Zuri was closely observing the human's reactions. The gorilla had developed a surprising understanding of the dynamics of these meetings, often intervening in his own way to direct attention to aspects that the scientists overlooked. At that moment, Zuri approached an area where samples of the studied medicinal plants were displayed. With deliberate gestures, he began to combine different leaves and barks, creating a mixture they hadn't seen before. "He's innovating," Olivia whispered, amazed. "He's not just repeating what he knows, he's experimenting with new combinations." This spontaneous act by Zuri captured the attention of all present, powerfully underlining the central message of the research. Intelligence and the capacity for innovation were not exclusive to humans. As the meeting continued, with scientists from around the world asking questions and proposing new lines of research, Ethan reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them to this point. What had begun as a conservation mission had transformed into a scientific and philosophical revolution. This is just the beginning, Ethan thought, observing how humans and gorillas worked side by side, each species contributing its unique strengths. We're redefining not just medicine and conservation, but our very relationship with the natural world. The sun was beginning to set over the Ituri forest, bathing the research center in a golden light. In that moment of stillness, with the soft murmur of the jungle as a backdrop, Ethan felt a deep connection with everything around him. The barrier between human and animal, between science and nature, had blurred, revealing a deeper truth about the interconnection of all life on the planet. The future that opened before them was full of exciting possibilities and challenges to overcome. But one thing was clear: the collaboration between species they had forged in Ituri had the potential to change the world, one discovery at a time. 5 years had passed since that crucial day at Omega Station. The Ituri Gorilla Collaborative Research Center had become a beacon of hope and progress, attracting scientists, conservationists, and world leaders from every corner of the planet. Ethan, now with a few more gray hairs, but the same passion burning in his eyes, walked along the elevated pathways of the center, accompanied by a UN delegation. The contrast between the delegates' formal suits and the lush green of the jungle was a visual reminder of the two worlds that had united in this unique place. "As you can see," Ethan explained, "we've managed to create a research ecosystem where humans and gorillas collaborate on equal terms. The discoveries we've made here have not only revolutionized medicine, but have transformed our understanding of animal intelligence and evolution." The UN ambassador, a serious-looking woman with eyes that sparkled with wonder, asked, "Dr. Morgan, how has this impacted gorilla conservation and the region's biodiversity?" Ethan smiled, remembering the initial challenges. "The gorilla population in Ituri hasn't just stabilized. It's grown by 30% in the last 5 years. More importantly, the deforestation rate in the region has dropped dramatically. Local people now see the forest not just as a resource to exploit, but as a living laboratory of incalculable value." As he spoke, a group of gorillas appeared in a nearby clearing. Among them, Ethan recognized Zuri, now an imposing silverback in the prime of his life. At his side, an infant played with what appeared to be a sampling device specifically designed to be manipulated by gorillas. "What you're witnessing," Ethan continued, "is the next generation of gorilla researchers. These youngsters have grown up in an environment where collaboration with humans is natural. They're learning to use scientific tools on their own initiative." The delegation watched in amazement as the gorillas interacted with various devices scattered throughout the clearing, collecting plant samples and making observations of their environment. "The medical advances we've achieved here are just the tip of the iceberg," Eleanor intervened, having joined the group. "The compound we developed based on the gorilla's traditional knowledge has not only proven effective against resistant tuberculosis, but has opened new avenues for treating autoimmune diseases and certain types of cancer." Dr. Klaus, who now headed the center's biomedical research department, added, "The most fascinating thing is how this has changed our approach to medicine. We're no longer simply looking to cure diseases, but to strengthen the body's natural defense systems. It's an approach that combines the best of modern science with the ancestral wisdom of nature." As the delegation continued its tour, Ethan separated from the group for a moment, approaching the clearing where Zuri and his family were resting. The gorilla, seeing him, stood up and approached with slow but sure steps. "Old friend," Ethan murmured, "we've come a long way together." Zuri extended his hand, a gesture they had developed over the years as a sign of mutual recognition. Ethan reciprocated the gesture, feeling the deep connection that transcended the barriers between species. At that moment, as if nature wanted to underscore the importance of the moment, a ray of sunlight broke through the jungle canopy, illuminating the clearing. Ethan observed how the light played among the leaves, creating a mosaic of shadows and brightness on Zuri's silver fur. "Dr. Morgan?" Olivia's voice pulled him from his reverie. "It's time for the final presentation." Nodding, Ethan silently bid farewell to Zuri and headed towards the natural amphitheater they had built for important events. There, scientists, world leaders, and representatives from local communities waited to hear the conclusions of 5 years of revolutionary research. Taking his place at the podium, Ethan looked at the diverse audience before him. He saw faces of all races and nationalities, united by a common purpose. On strategically distributed screens, he noticed that groups of gorillas were also watching from various points around the center. 5 years ago, he began, we embarked on a journey that many considered impossible. We set out not just to study gorillas, but to learn from them and with them. Today, I can say with certainty that this journey has transformed not only our understanding of nature, but of ourselves. As Ethan spoke, images and data were projected behind him, showing the center's achievements, new medical treatments, advances in understanding animal intelligence, sustainable conservation models that were being replicated around the world. But our greatest achievement, he continued, his voice charged with emotion, can't be measured in scientific papers or medical patents. What we've accomplished here is to bridge two worlds that for too long we've considered separate. We've rediscovered our fundamental connection with nature, and in the process, we've opened doors to a future where collaboration between species is not just possible, but essential. As he concluded his speech, Ethan noticed that Zuri and his group had approached the edge of the amphitheater. The gorilla, as if understanding the importance of the moment, emitted a soft grunt that resonated in the expectant silence. "This is the true legacy of Ituri," Ethan declared, gesturing towards Zuri. "A future where mutual respect and collaboration between all forms of life is not a utopia, but a tangible reality. A future we're building together, step by step, discovery by discovery." As the amphitheater erupted in applause, Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The road had been long and full of challenges, but the results surpassed his most ambitious dreams. The Ituri forest, once threatened, had become a symbol of hope and a model for the world. That night, as the full moon illuminated the jungle, Ethan found himself back on the observation platform. In the distance, he could hear the nocturnal vocalizations of the gorillas mixed with the familiar sounds of the jungle. The Ituri Gorilla Collaborative Research Center slept, but its impact continued to reverberate around the world. Taking out his old journal, Ethan wrote a final entry. "When I began this journey, I sought to save a species. Along the way, I discovered that true salvation lies in recognizing our interdependence with all life on this planet. The Ituri gorillas were not simply subjects of study. They became our teachers, our collaborators, our guides towards a wiser and more compassionate future. The legacy of Ituri is not just scientific. It's a testament to the power of collaboration, empathy, and mutual respect. It's a reminder that the boundaries we've erected between ourselves and the natural world are illusory. In the wisdom of the jungle and the intelligence of our evolutionary cousins, we've found not just cures for diseases, but a path towards healing our relationship with the planet. As I look to the future, I see a world where science and nature are not in conflict, but in harmony. A world where intelligence and consciousness are recognized and celebrated in all their forms. This is Ituri's gift to the world, a legacy that transcends species and generations. The journey continues, and with each step, we come closer to understanding our place in the great web of life. And in that understanding, we find not just knowledge, but wisdom. Ethan closed his journal, storing in his heart the memories of every challenge, every discovery, and every moment of connection with his gorilla collaborators. Night embraced the Ituri forest, and with it the promise of a new dawn, a future forged in collaboration between two worlds that, in reality, had always been one.